Welcome, everyone, to the Computational Sustainability Virtual Seminar Series. We are happy to offer this opportunity for those interested in computing and sustainability across the globe. This virtual seminar series is being organized by CompSusNet with support from the National Science Foundation and Cornell University. My name is Doug Fisher, and I'm the Director for Outreach, Education, Diversity, and Synthesis of CompSusNet. I and other members of the outreach team, which includes Carla Gomes and Rich Bernstein, we'll be scheduling talks on computational sustainability regularly, posting them to the URL given on this slide, the center of this slide. During the webinar, you can ask questions through the question and answer facility on Zoom or the chat facility, which will be related to the speaker as time allows. We may wait until the end of the presentation to raise these questions, or in keeping with a desire for more interaction online, we will very often ask the speaker to comment as the questions come in. As a suggestion, you might try and find the chat window now and go and say hello to everybody. We'll get to know that you're there, and you'll know where the chat window is and where you can ask questions. CompSusNet has several social media outlets, including Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and the CompSusNet blog, which, again, you can find on the website. It's a thrill having today, a pleasure to have today's speaker, Professor Tanya Berger-Wolf. Professor Berger-Wolf is a professor at University of Illinois at Chicago. She got her PhD in computer science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. At the University of Illinois Chicago, she heads the Computational Population Biology Lab, and she is co-founder of conservation software nonprofit Wildbook, which recently enabled a historic complete species census of endangered Gravy's zebra using photographs taken from ordinary citizens in Kenya. She's received many teaching and mentoring awards, including a National Science Foundation Career Award. And the Association for Women in Science Chicago Innovator Award. So, Professor Berger-Wolf, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. And I hope that my voice stays throughout the whole time. So with that, let me share my screen and start the presentation. Okay. Right. So computational behavioral ecology. I think for majority of the audience, I might not have to define the computational part of it, but certainly the behavioral ecology. Formally, it's the study of the ecological and evolutionary basis for animal behavior and the roles of behavior in enabling an animal to adapt to its environment. So to simplify, really, what does an animal gain in fitness terms, evolutionary fitness terms, by doing this rather than that? And the majority of my colleagues, biology colleagues with whom I collaborate, really are interested in the social behavior of animals. And that's what my research trajectory, most of my research has been designing computational methods to be able to answer questions about animal social behavior. So if you look online, what does ecological data collection look like? This is kind of what you will get. Ecology is a field science, and majority of the time, biologists, ecologists like to spend in the field, and it's an observation-based, hypothesis-driven science with what's known as muddy boot ecologists. So this is, and including in ecologists who are interested in social behavior of animals. So this is a picture of my former postdoc, David Papano, who was studying the social behavior of gelada, not ice cream. These are primates. Herbivore primates in Ethiopia, they eat grass, and they're very accepting of humans looking at them throughout the whole day. So there are two ways essentially to study social interactions of animals traditionally. One is to do these kind of timed scans, about maybe 10, 15 minutes. You're scanning the entire population and record every interaction that is observed. And in fact, David here, that's what he's doing. And you may notice there is something in his hands. And he can recognize, yes, he can recognize most of these guys that look identical to us. Or you can have a focal individual and follow it throughout for some fixed period of time and record every interaction that that particular individual has. So you may even have a couple of helpers there. As you can see in the background, there's a couple other people also observing, but certainly neither technique allows you to really observe all the interactions of all the individuals all the time, and you miss quite a few. And if you notice, there's on the in this top left there, the resolution may not be good enough, but there's a whole bunch of animals that are up there and also further out, clearly not in the field view of any of those three observers. And as we know, as we have really found out over the years, that all the social analysis methods, social network analysis methods, are highly sensitive to missing data and this and sort of bursty observation data. So how can, first of all, the first question then is, how can computational techniques enable better data, better observation, better data collection for ecologists, for behavioral ecologists, and in general for biodiversity research? So one of the ways to do so is, these are ants from University of Lausanne. You can put QR codes on each ant. That's clearly a job for a graduate student. And then you can put a camera on top. You can create, let's say, out of styrofoam, hundreds of those nests with a colony in each nest, with a QR code on each ant, and put cameras to track all of them. And so then you really can have interactions, observe all their movement. And if you notice, there are edges here when the ants are close enough for long enough, and we really have to figure out what's close and what's long. You can put QR codes on bees as well. These are from Bee Space at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, or you can color code your ants. And these are from University of Arizona. You can tattoo your frogs and so on. So there are techniques to observe maybe small animals. And what you're hearing, it's the Tungara frog call, which they interact vocally. So that's the sound that if you're hearing. So, but what about larger animals? And of course, we can put GPS collars on larger animals as well. And here's a zebra with a collar. And this is not a stripe. This is a solar panel that allows the GPS collar to run a little bit longer. And then you can use the location of animals as the proxy for, well, and from, again, close enough for long enough as the social interaction definition. You can even create orientation here, use the orientation of an animal, and so we can remove the edges when they look in an opposite direction. And so in collaboration with Meg Crawford from University of California at Davis, she is a evolutionary anthropologist. It means that she studies behavior of primates that are not humans. So tracked an entire troop of baboons for a month using GPS collars that take location every second, so 1 hertz, and accelerometers 20 times per second. So this is a day in the life of a troop of baboons. And I have a question for you as you're watching this, so you don't have to answer it right now, but answer for yourself. So notice that there's this group of 5 animals that started the movement from, so they're sleeping in the morning, they're sleeping in the trees over the river, and then this group of 5 animals started movement. And watch this particular individual, this one. Can you see my mouse? hopefully. Okay, watch it. There you go. So watch again what happened and answer yourself at least. Whether it's a male, female, juvenile, adult, dominant, subordinate, individual. So here it is, right there. Okay. So while the baboons are crossing the rest, notice how they're organizing into this kind of one coherent group as they're crossing the open space to go to the right side of the to the east side of this opening to forage throughout the day. So as I said, we can use, we'll come back to this particular troop and this particular day in their life. So as I said, we can put GPS collars on baboons, and in fact, we have a project where we're designing an entire system of sensors to put on the same actual baboons, the same troop, since they're behaving so nicely, to track not only their location, but the entire suite of behaviors, individual, pairwise, and group-level behavior, and the machine learning approaches that would translate the sensor data into behavioral data. We're deploying it in August. But today, one of the most abundant, readily available sources of information about animals, as well as everything else, are images. So the images, the photographs, are coming from camera traps, field assistants, scientists taking pictures in the field, and drones, and even tourists taking pictures on their safari or whale watching tours, as well as accidental photographers posting their pictures on social media. So these two pictures are from a course that Dan Rubinstein from Princeton University, ecologist from Princeton University, and I co-teach a course called Field Computational Ecology, where we take ecology and computer science students, give them background in both disciplines, and then take them to Kenya for 3 weeks, throw them in the field, tell them go and do something amazing and interdisciplinary, and they invariably do. One of the things that they did, so if you're taking pictures, it's not enough just to be able to have those pictures, you need to be able to identify individual animals. And in 2010, the first time we taught the course, one of the first projects was a student project of identifying individual animal, zebras, specifically these ones, plain zebras, from photographs. And so it grew into a whole big project way beyond zebras. And this is in collaboration and eventually into this system called Wildbook, which is now a nonprofit, and that's in collaboration with Dan Rubinstein, the ecologist from Princeton, Chuck Stewart, computer vision researcher from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and Jason Holmberg, data architect from nonprofit WildMe. So we can take all these hundreds of thousands of images that come from scientists and tourists and camera traps and drones, and find all the pictures of, let's say, zebras. Can you see all the pictures of zebras here? I'm sure if you squint, you will.
Yes.
So we can find all the, so we design computer vision algorithms that can pull out all the images that contain animals, localize the animals in those images, and classify their species, including for animals that are herd animals and can be occluded or in the water, or you can probably make out that little baby elephant that's behind there. But we can go even further. Not only can we say that this is an elephant, whale, turtle, or zebra, we can say that this is Ellie the elephant and Willie the whale and Terry the turtle and Zippy the zebra. So we've designed algorithms that can identify down to individual animal. And we can do it for any striped, spotted, wrinkled, or notched animals, or even they use the shape of the whale's fluke, or the dorsal fin of a dolphin. And with that, and the information on when and where the image was taken, we really can now track an animal in space using images, or look at its social network. And I'm actually going to switch to demo. So this is, we've built several of these Wildbooks. So this is Wildbook for whale sharks. It started out with several hundred known individuals. Today it's nearly 9,000. One of the things that we do for whale sharks, we started scraping YouTube videos and use our algorithm for identifying individuals in videos. So you can see here. You can even hear it. And we use natural language processing for processing text and audio to find when and where the video was taken, and a bot that automatically posts in the comments on YouTube saying, here, 2 minutes and 46 seconds, we identified this particular individual. You can, there's a URL for that individual, and you can look at the Wildbook page associated with it, which includes here, that's the sighting of, that's taken from YouTube. It's Cancun in July 2017. As you can see, that's identified from the text right here, Cancun, July 2017. And sorry, the bar, okay, there we go. And and then we have the social network. In this case, they're not very social, these particular animals, but also the location here is Cancun. And so this one lives mostly in Cancun. But most importantly, we also have, not most importantly, but in addition to that, we also have all different people who are studying the same animal or cited it at different times. And so they could create their own social network through the pages of Wildbook. And in November 2017, so last November, Wildbook enabled the most comprehensive study of the biology of these animals that was not possible before because they're global species, and the study was co-authored by 38 authors that met through the pages of Wildbook and was featured in New York Times and National Geographic. Oops. So we really can enable science at a scale which was never before possible by bringing people together. Okay, and today we have about 20 of these Wildbooks from species ranging from lynx and giraffe to a couple of projects with World Wildlife Fund. And, one of them is for seals in Finland, and one of my favorite also with WWF is a new one coming up, is Internet of Turtles for all 7 species of sea turtles, which in my opinion is the real IoT. So Wildbook was deployed for the first time in January 2015 at the Lewa Conservancy in Kenya. And it was deployed for the Grevy's zebras, the endangered species of zebras, which if you're thinking zebras, you're probably thinking plain zebras, Serengeti, massive migration. These are not the ones. These are different ones. And so the conservation managers at Lewa, which is also the headquarters of the Grevy Zebra Conservation Trust, Grevy Zebra Trust, they realize that there are not enough, so they do these monthly patrols and they observe the Grevy zebras, and they notice that there are probably not enough juveniles surviving to adulthood, but they didn't have hard numbers. And when the system was deployed, when Wildbook was deployed, they really could track from juvenile to adulthood the animals, and the strike patterns don't change, so they could really put hard numbers on how many survive and say that there are not enough. And the culprit are these other endangered animals, the lions, who are doing way too well, unfortunately. And with these hard numbers, Grevy Zebra Trust could go to the Kenya Wildlife Service to ask for the lion population management strategy to mitigate the high predation pressure on the zebras. So they start contraception program essentially for lions. Using this, so for the in 2016, in January 2016, we did the first ever full species census of the gravy zebra using photographs from just people driving around the country for 2 days. So 95% of gravy zebra are in Kenya, and so for 2 days, people from school kids and local tribal chiefs to U.S. Ambassador to Kenya Bob Godek and tourists with telephoto cameras took more than 40,000 images, and we analyzed them all and gave the most accurate census of the species ever, which unfortunately is still too low, 2,352 animals. And it was so accurate that it became the official number for the International Unit for Conservation of Nature, and the Kenya Wildlife Service asked us to do it again, and we did this January. We did the second ever full census, full species census using photographs from citizens, and this time more than 1,000 people, which was last January, more than 1,000 people participated. We have more than 70,000 images. We're still analyzing it, and we will present the results at the Black and White Ball in June in Kenya. So of course, when we're switching the mode of data collection for any study, for any domain, the first question is, do our models that were relying on previous data collection techniques still hold? For example, do our models that relied on site-recite or population scan collection, data collection for estimating population size still hold when we're using just pictures from people driving around for 2 days? But of course, every source of data is biased. Camera traps are biased by location, drones by geometry of the route, and any human observer is biased in many different ways. We've looked at the biases, explicitly the biases of photographs coming from tourists that range within the same car on the same tour, from people take from 400 to 2 pictures. Some take only pictures of big cats, other only of birds. They're birders. Novices take, 100 pictures in the first hour, and then they drop down to, taking just a few. And the experienced tourists sort of have a steady rate. So all of these biases feed into the resulting bias of what is it that the data that we get from photographs. And so we've explicitly tested our results for both spatial and reciting bias. And it turns out that the site-recite curve, so the recite curve of how many animals that we have already seen on the first day of the count we see on the second one, was essentially saturated by the mid-morning of the second day, which is unheard of in counts like this. So this is really the highest certainty, highest confidence level count that has ever been produced for the species. And as I said, it is now the official number for the International Unit of Conservation of Nature red list, and as whale shark as well, the numbers for IUCN red list come from Wildbook, as well as for 2 other species. So it is a viable way of collecting data. So what else can computation do for behavioral ecology? And what can behavioral ecology do for us? So other than the enabling better, brighter, shinier, bigger scale and higher resolution data collection, of course, when the data becomes so large, we also need different approaches for analyzing it and extracting models and hypotheses and patterns out of those data. And so my interest particularly is on social network analysis. And one of the first questions when we go from data to network, as I said, most of the time it will be something like, okay, if the animals are close enough for long enough, or if they have been seen in the photograph together, then we'll consider it a social interaction. And there have been work recently done by biologists showing that that is a very dangerous way of defining a network, and it can lead to lots of spurious conclusions. And that's work done by another one of my former postdocs, Damien Farine, who is now at Max Planck Institute, and Hal Whitehead. So a network, a social network, is a model, and just like any other model of the data, it's only as good as the answers that it allows us to get on the data that we could not get without that particular model. And so that's the definition and the direction of research that my current PhD student, Tanya Berger, is engaged in. And there's a survey coming out on network inference from data, and a lot of work that has been done of how do you find the best, in terms of the model, network for a question that you're asking on the data. And how do we ensure that our answer based on the network are actually the best for the data and the question. And one of the first questions that we should really ask when we have data of social animals, or including humans, is whether there is actually a network effect, or whether the question we're trying to answer really is not a network question. And so back to our baboons that we tracked for a month. The biologists ask whether their positioning within the group, and they are social animals, so they move as a group most of the time, as you saw, whether the positioning as a group depends purely on their demographic status, such as juvenile, adult, female, male, and so on, or their individual variations. And so we showed, using machine learning approaches, that the most supported hypothesis is really that their individual variation and local interaction rules of who they interact with that best explain the emergent pattern of the spatial organization in those baboons. So we can use computational approaches to test different hypotheses. And we can go further. So can we predict, not only explain, but can we predict the location of an individual? And we can ask it so we can test, again, alternative hypothesis. If the location of an individual is best, it can be predicted purely from the past history of the locations of that individual, then really this is not a network effect, right? Their location is just my preference of where I want to go. And we can compare it to different definitions of the network, and ask whether my neighbors predict my location in the future. And so that's exactly what we did. And turns out that both nearest neighbors and long-term affiliates predict the individual's location, and it depends on the time scale at which we're trying to predict. So if we're trying to predict really just a couple of minutes into the future, it's the immediate neighbors of the individuals that are the most predictive of its location, versus if we're talking a little bit longer term, it's the most frequent interactions. It's the friends, essentially, of that individuals that are most predictive. And it's not shockingly surprising. What's interesting is a couple of things. So one is that it's 4 to 6 individuals, neighbors, that are most predictive in both cases, even though the entire troop is about 30 individuals. So you lose predictive accuracy if you go beyond 6. And so there's some interesting biological corroboration that primates, non-human primates, can count, just like we can easily, without counting, just see numbers of about 7. Non-human primates can see numbers of about 4 or 5. So this is, and keep track of 4 or 5 objects. And so when we decide where to go, in the long-term objective and long-term goal, it's we're following our friends, but when we're deciding locally, when baboons, sorry, deciding locally whether to turn left or right around this tree, they're just following their nearest neighbors. So we can also go a little bit further and ask, so how do these social animals make decisions? So in general, what kinds of decisions do they make socially? And so again, this is work in collaboration with Meg Crawford, just like before, Meg Crawford and an entire team of biologists and computer scientists. So it's Meg Crawford, Damien Farine, Ian Cousin, and his PhD student, Ariana Sandberg-Peshkin, and my PhD students, Giovanna Lee and Ivan Berger. And the leadership project is in addition also Chai Amarbanchanbay. So the question is, do animals, social animals, make decisions collectively? And if so, can we figure out the mechanism by which they make this decision? Is it dictatorship? They're all following one particular alpha, or is it a form of voting majority, or is it just going back to our movement example? Everybody just looking at their individual neighbors, at their nearest neighbors, and following them. So in the biological studies by the same group show that there's in baboons, shared decision-making really drives collective movement. And so we created a methodology, the whole sort of suite of methods, where given the multidimensional time series, such as trajectories of a troop of baboons, we extract what is called as the notion of following. Individual A follows individual B if their trajectory shape is sufficiently similar, and more generally, their time series shape is sufficiently similar with a time delay, small time delay. And that allows us to really identify reliably periods of group coordination when the entire group really is coordinated to a certain pattern of behavior. And so that means that the decision for that coordination was made before, right? So if they're coordinated here, it means that the decision to do whatever it is that they're doing as a group collectively came right before. And so we can focus on this pre-coordination period and find who initiated it and what is the pattern of following. And so to bring you back to the same day in the life of the baboons, a little bit sped up, you can now watch. So here's those 5 that started out and the whole movement. And you can now follow the history and watch. There is I'm gonna go back a little bit. There is going to be a baboon, kind of in black colored baboon here coming. That's the same one that I was directing your attention to before, except now we don't have the network on top, and you can see, try to figure out what happened. So if you remember your answer before, let's see whether it changes now. Okay. So there it is. And they're all coordinated. Okay, so unfortunately, it's not as interactive as before, but as normally these talks are. So most people, when they see a network, they think that this is a juvenile male that tries to bring the two groups of or the two groups of baboons together. But when we remove the network, which actually is producing false intuition in this case, we can see that this individual kind of comes together and doesn't really try. It's the alpha male who goes back so that the whole troop wakes up. The scouts are going to make sure it's not dangerous for the troop to go. Once they're okay, the alpha male gets up and he's ready to go and eat, and he wants to make sure that he's the first one really there to eat. So he goes back to the rest of the troop, faces them, and essentially does this. And everybody scatters. So he's not trying to bring the troop with him, he's actually trying to scare them away. So network can be deceiving, but there is a mechanism by which, look how coordinated the entire troop is. And so what is the mechanism? Is it that that alpha male actually brought the rest of the troop with him, or is it a self sort of coordinating mechanism? And so using our approach, we really can answer this question by comparing different mechanisms of coordination, such as just random, or following one individual, or the hierarchical, or the local neighborhood. And baboons are very much, so we can train a classifier and then ask on the baboon data, and it really is that the baboons are following their local neighborhood. They're pretty democratic primates. So that goes very much consistent with our previous work, that they're following a local neighborhood of either friends or just proximity. Okay, final example that I will show is the question that started my entire line of research 13 years ago in January 2005. Biologists asked me whether, so there is two species of equids, horse-like, of the species horses. One is the Grevy's zebra, and the other one is wild asses, onagers, that are very similar in many ways, but yet, and both are sort of fission fusion species, so they're social, but their groups split and merge. And the question is, can we quantify in some way? Can we figure out whether one is more cohesive, despite the splitting and merging, more cohesive than another? And so it took us about 10 years to answer this question, but here's how we came to an answer. So if we look at a history of interaction, so let's say we go out on the first day and we see the zebras in groups. Let's say we already figured out how to define the interactions. And so we have the 1, 2, and 3 together, 4 by itself and 5 by itself. And then a couple of hours later, we go and we see 2, 3, and 4 together, or on the second day, 5 by itself and 1 by itself. And then the next day, we see 5 and 2 together, 3 is missing, we don't see it at all, and 4 by itself and 1. And so the question is it completely random assortment, or is there something that we're not observing that's driving this pattern of interactions? Something maybe that there is a blue community, a green community, and a red community, and let's say maybe we would like to be able to tell a story like this, that 5 is really the core of the blue community, and 4 is the core of the green, and 1 and 3 are the core of the red one. But and 2 is the social butterfly that's really changing its affiliations, visiting and changing again. But yet there is this really 3 core communities, and that's what drives their interactions. So how can we extract the most parsimonious explanation like this, of this kind, given the observations of groups? And so the notion of communities in social networks in general, more in social interactions, is an old one, and quite often used to explain the observed interaction. So communities are defined, literally textbook definition is that it's cohesive subgroups of actors among whom there are relatively strong, direct, intense, frequent, or positive ties. And the key word here is relatively. Relative to what? Right? So if I look at the Gomez lab picture right there, hi guys, I cannot tell you whether you guys are a community by just looking at you. I need to look at your interactions within a larger context of other interaction to tell whether the interactions among you are relatively strong relative to other interactions. And so essentially this definition of community is a cluster, right? This is a set of points that are closer to each other than they are to points in other clusters. So if we want to look at dynamic communities, we want to look at dynamic clusters and somehow find a way to define this notion of closer or further. And that is the notion of social costs. And so a lot of social and behavioral ecology literature tells us that if there is that latent notion of communities, then individuals are reluctant to switch community affiliations, but they can, but there is a cost of switching, and it is very measurable cost. It's measured in when an individual switches a community, a troop, or if you move to another university, then the stress hormones go up, the harassment levels go up, access to resources goes down, and typically the social status drops. If there is such a notion of communities, we also posit that individuals are mostly seen with their own community. Otherwise, if it's not, the communities are not driving their social interactions. So they're mostly seen with their own community, but they can visit others, but there is a cost of visit. And I'm sorry, one second. Right. Individuals are mostly seen with their own community, but there is a cost of visit, which also is measured in this stress hormones and access to resources, which in some cases, the visit can be higher than the switching and others lower. So if you switch from one wireless carrier to another, they really incentivize you to switch, but disincentivize the visit. But in many other cases, and if a member of another troop tries to join a baboon troop, then they really disincentivize that visit. And finally, individuals are rarely absent from their own community, and there is a cost of that absence. So with that, we can formulate a parsimonious explanation of the community affiliation over time, given these costs. And so I'll skip this part, but go directly to the gravy zebras and onagers, and to that original question. So we have two species that are equids, social equids, that have fission fusion structure, that's groups that split and merge. And they're very similar. They're territorial males, harem females. They're very similar in many other ways. And yet the pattern of their social interactions, when we look at this is the most parsimonious community explanation that we could find. And the time goes from top to bottom. And even if you don't know anything about dynamic communities, it's clear that these are different. One is has more cohesive than the other. And so behavioral ecology will tell us that animals are social for fundamentally two reasons. One is resource constraint, they have to go to the same water hole. It's not that they care about who is next to them, but they have to tolerate them. We have to go to the same coffee shop or train station. And in that case, the communities are not going to be very cohesive. We just need to tolerate each other. The other extreme is avoidance of danger. So the schools of fish and flocks of bird are the extreme cases of it. You want to be as similar as everybody else and know that your friends with whom you have some history of past interactions will get your back when you won't be the only one screaming your radical opinion on the corner. And in that case, you're going to have pretty cohesive sets of social interactions. So in this two, one is resource constraint, the other one has predators. So can you tell me which one is which? Semi-rhetorical question. So these guys, so zebras have much more cohesive pattern of social interactions. They have lions as predators, and these ones do not. So onagers do not have predators, but they're constrained by water. And so we can go further and characterize their dynamics of social interactions, but by many different statistics on the dynamic communities, and then project it into the first two components of the social space of PCA space. And turns out that onagers and gravy zebras, as well as females and males, occupy 4 different quadrants of that space, which tells us that their social interactions are driven by different resource needs of the 4 different demographic classes. And it also suggests to biologists a hypothesis of what is it in their social interactions that is driven by their evolutionary and ecological history. And so that took us, as I said, 10 years to answer that question. And we're putting out an entire R package of, for analysis of dynamic networks, temporal graphs, T-graph. And this is my own network of professional social interactions, as well as the agencies that supported this research. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, any questions?
Yeah, I have one question. I'll lead off. We talk about work in computational sustainability leading to novel computational abstractions. Mm-hmm. And so I'm someone who used to do a lot of work in clustering. And this is the first time I've seen examples of what even before you got to dynamic clustering, I was Googling it because you were clearly illustrating the concept. And is this a case where your work or other people's work in ecology has at least been, if it wasn't one of the first instances of this, it was one of the early instances of a computational abstraction that we might call dynamic clustering that is now something you can formalize quite independent of the original domain? Yes, and we applied it to other, to clustering time series for brain activity, and I'm now pushing it to really formulate it as an independent notion of dynamic clustering. So it's really, Doug, you're absolutely right. This is an example where an ecological question, a biological question, necessitated the development of a new computational abstraction that can generalize then to other problems. Okay, very good. Yeah, as well as sort of help generate different new hypotheses and insight in ecology. So that's a happy outcome. Mm-hmm. Not common. Right. No, that is right. Yeah. Other questions? I am not seeing other questions. Well, it was crystal clear, clearly. You were very clear. And you're to be congratulated because you did this as you were coming down with the flu. So we appreciate your being here. Thank you. I can show you just fun pictures of Wildbook. If there are no questions, you can then just look at whale social networks if we want to wait for a bit or not. Here's a Pinchy, celebrity whale. I guess I have an additional question that has to do with outreach. Yes. I don't, in my experience on Facebook with old high school friends, it is rare to find issues that are nonpartisan. For whatever reason, the baby boomers seem to be extremely bifurcated. And but the one thing and this is a serious comment, the one thing that everyone likes has to do with animals. It is the one aspect of environmentalism and conservation that my most conservative friends can get behind. And I'm wondering if that's your experience with Wildbook. Is this an outreach tool, and the focus on animals and getting to know animals even at a personal level? Is this something that's worthwhile, we should better exploit?
It is absolutely our experience. We say that everybody loves animals, and it is uncontroversial that that you want to learn more about them, that we want to save them. In principle, it's when it comes to details, right? But certainly we say that this ability to just take a picture and find out more about the animal and follow that animal, it democratizes science and conservation both. It demystifies it in many ways, and it makes it very, very personal. And we find that from very young kids on any spectrum, anywhere in the world, people engage, and it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum, or whether you're a Maasai warrior or an urban living Chicagoan. It really brings people together in ways that even we didn't anticipate before. So we have, of course, many stories, but in many these contrast pictures, kind of examples from the recent Grevy's rally. One of the best quotes that was said by a deputy warden of the Kenya Wildlife Service was, "Data is wealth," and I absolutely believe that. But he followed up saying that our animals are not only our animals are our wealth and treasure, but it's the data about them. And I think the animals, this desire in general to look at cute pictures of animals, and we find that when we need to Amazon, when we need Amazon Mechanical Turk for labeling pictures of animals, quite often people do that without any for free, because they just want to look and ask us to give us more pictures. So people like looking at pictures of animals. People like looking at animals when they can. People really unite around these issues. And in addition to that unifying kind of, yes, animals are wonderful, data-driven policy about animals allows then to make decisions behind which people from different parts of the political spectrum can really feel comfortable about those decisions. That has been our experience.
Okay. What's the most local example you've seen somebody create a Wildbook for? I mean, has somebody gone to the extent that they've created a Wildbook for squirrels at Vanderbilt University?
No, not yet. But there is a Wildbook for turtles in Mali that people have created. We just got a request from I'm looking it up because I don't want to, but so this is a marine mammal conservation working in Adriatic, and so she's creating her own Wildbook. We generally try to kind of not to have too many local and fragmented Wildbooks, but expanded, and because that gives you, animals do not respect political and other kinds of jurisdictions. They cross borders. But we have a Wildbook that we're working on for Brookfield Zoo in Chicago for the giraffes. So you would be able to go up and go up to the giraffe enclosure. They have 7 giraffes and say, oh, that one, that's Mitra. She's a 3-year-old female, and similarly expanded to other zoos for more animals. So we're starting to work with the San Diego Zoo as well. So that's a very local.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I might have some follow-up on that later, but I will email you offline.
Sure.
Any last questions? All right. Well, let's give Tanya another thank you. And we will reconvene later. Thanks so much.